Balzoy. I'm the co-founder of End Workplace Abuse. I'm testifying in support of H8044, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. As a survivor and longtime advocate, I've connected with hundreds of targets of workplace abuse over the last decade. And I hear the same themes over and over again, that employers are robbing us of all that we worked for with no consequences, and discrimination law is not enough to help us, even though so many targets of workplace abuse see a discriminatory impact. We deserve better. Right now, women, BIPOC workers, workers with disabilities, workers over 40, and workers in the LGBTQ plus community simply don't have adequate protections from bias that manifests itself in abuse of power, yet we're most likely to endure abuse at work. Currently, civil rights law supposedly protects us from discrimination, but not without proving intent, which the courts moved to from impact in the 1980s, and which renders discrimination law ineffective at dismantling the social hierarchies it was aimed to dismantle. It's a huge gap in the law that's existed for far too long. When we report abuse, the vast majority of employers either retaliate to avoid liability or do nothing to address the abuse. Knowing there's a huge asymmetry of power, workers generally don't sue. So we see a reinforcement of a culture in which employers do as they please to keep themselves in power with little to no consequences. This bill fixes this widespread problem of inadequate protections for employees from bias that result in abuse that prevents those in marginalized groups from getting ahead. We focus on mistreatment and impact rather than intent to change the system that's keeping the glass ceiling sturdily in place and preventing the broken rung to get ahead from getting fixed. Without accountability, our employers perpetuate stereotypes to keep the status quo. Our courts do the same. That leaves only one group with the power to make change around this issue that affects people's physical and mental health, careers, bank accounts, personal relationships, and even whether they live or die. That group is you. So I ask you to move the bill forward.
I was a school teacher for almost 3 decades. I loved my job. I taught public school for about 10 years, and then the rest of my career I worked at a little private school that was kind of like working in a public school because the population was public school children. Middle school.
Is your red light
Sorry.
on?
Is it on? Yeah.
It is
Should I
now.
move this closer? I'm sorry. Well, let me get to the point. I love my job, and I taught reading, writing, math, science. I ran the 5th grade. I ran the science department. I did after-school programs, summer programs with these inner-city kids, and I loved it. But I had the misfortune of working with a bully. She started 6 years before I was what's called mobbed out of my job. I had never heard of workplace mobbing before. It happened to me 12 years ago, but it's a well-studied phenomena that's illegal in most Western nations except the United States. So I'm really hopeful that Rhode Island can be the pioneers in terms of this form of labor protection. Workplace mobbing is a form of group psychological abuse. It's initiated by one, sad to say, narcissistic bully whose intent is to drive you out, which, typically you leave a job and you get another job, but workplace mobbing involves a lot of psychological abuse and bullying, which is very traumatic. So I haven't worked in 12 years, and I calculate that what I was making when I left my job, I would have been paying in this year's income tax over $12,000. So that times 12 years is a lot of money that would have gone back into our economy. But sadly, I chose to leave my career because I needed to heal, and my husband wanted me to be healed for my kids. I, I really hope that this law passes so that there are avenues not only for employees to go and get help, but for managers and human resources when they don't know how to manage these people. But you know who knows how to manage these people? The US government. Lawmakers like yourselves, which make this kind of behavior illegal. It's illegal to sexually harass someone on the job. It's illegal to discriminate on the job. And it should be illegal to bully on the job. And Deb and her, the people that work under her, with her, have laid out the behaviors of workplace bullying, which are pretty easy to identify. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Chair Corvese, Vice Chairs, Honorable House Labor Committee members. My name is Vicki Cordemanch. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 8044. I want to see employers held accountable for psychologically toxic work environments. In 2018, I walked away from my job without another lined up, which beautifully displays the desperateness I felt. I just couldn't take any more psychological abuse. 9 months before, I made the mistake of reporting the mentally provocative behavior of a workplace bully to HR. All 3 HR employees told me they represented our employer and its best interests, not mine. I nodded. I was told that the situation would be addressed, that there was a complaint process and an investigation would unfold. I was comforted by that. That was the second mistake I made. I believed them. Nothing was ever done to alter my work environment with the exception of making it worse. The bully's behavior escalated. Months went by in silence. It became a she said, and then the tables were turned against me. All the while, my health declined in sync. The bully wasn't the only one abusing me. Fraud experts refer to it as a cloak of authority. The perpetrators were sitting in an administrative office building on a college campus cashing 6-figure paychecks. It never crossed my mind once that the protocol they put forth was fraudulent, nor did I ever suspect they would conspire against me. Perhaps if they were sitting behind bars, I would have been better able to discern. Employers are not liable for psychologically abusive behavior, nor do they want to be. Because I reported the abusive behavior, I was the one my employer perceived to be a threat of liability, not the bully. So they purged me from the payroll cruelly and inhumanely. Snapping under stress, silent killer stress, is as predictable as the sun coming up. No fingerprints, no black and blues, no heart, no common decency, just human carnage. You see, employers can't be held liable for issues of which they have no knowledge, so they make it go away. When I snapped and went out the door, so did my employer's threat of liability. My humanity was ignored, and I was deprived my basic human rights to equality, respect, dignity, and fair process to scratch the surface. Researchers refer to bullying and the institutional complicity of disregarding complaints as processes of dehumanization and traumatization. I suffered significant health harm, most notably a brain injury. The cemented stance of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, must be held accountable. I will never forget the horror I felt when I realized the premeditation, or in the aftermath when I found out that my FMLA paperwork had been contrived to infer that I was mentally ill should I dare speak out, nor when I found out that I had no legal recourse for any of it. The perpetrators don't show you to the door. They make sure that you never come back to point an accusatory finger. I was deathly afraid of my abusers for years, and rightly so. They got away with it all. Multiple crimes and violations of basic human rights under the radar of any form of viable accountability. Employers control the work environment. Laws control the employer. Please move H8044 forward.
Good afternoon, Chair Corvese, Vice Chairs, Honorable House Labor Committee members. My name is Norman Quartermanch. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 8044. I would like to see this legislation passed because I've seen the debilitating effects on a loved one firsthand. Over the course of several years, my wife was bullied and mobbed at a job that she loved and did well. Why, you ask? Because there was jealousy and fear in the bully's eyes, because of the fact that my wife did her job better than the bully, was smarter than the bully, and was more attractive than the bully. The bully attempted to do everything she could to discredit my wife. I wonder how you would feel if you watched your loved one go from a vibrant, happy person who loved her job reduced to a puddle because of bullying and her institution's failure to address it. Think for a moment how you would feel like in a situation like that. My first thought was to exact revenge, but that isn't what it's all about. I would try to do anything that would make my wife feel better, but things kept deteriorating as time went on. Every morning, I told her I loved her and not let anything happen to her as she walked out the door with tears in her eyes. She did all the right things, but none of it mattered. After she left work, the depression was debilitating. But worse than that, she was also diagnosed with PTSD. That is damage to your brain you get in wars. She got that going to work. There were many sleepless or restless nights that came about because of this. Employees need to be held responsible for the work environment and the actions of their employees and taken seriously when someone comes to them with complaints of abuse. With over 200 documented emails proving that this bullying was going on, she went through the proper channels, but that only led to more abuse. This was an institution of higher education. Not only do I think that institution is responsible for their actions in that situation, but the state should also share some of that responsibility. It is time for legislators to take a stand against bullying in any form in the workplace. There needs to be dignity, and there needs to be a safe environment where people can work and do their jobs without being harassed, bullied, and mobbed by the institution or the company they work for. This should not be a situation where you need to toughen up, put your nose to the grindstone, and just keep working, which is what most people would say or think, because they do not understand the dynamics or the devastating effects of workplace bullying and mobbing. I have seen it firsthand, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Please move H8044 forward. Thank you.
House Committee on Labor, thank you for the opportunity to share my story. The Workplace Psychological Safety Bill H8044 will offer Rhode Island workers much needed legal protection from abusive management practices. I'm Matt Packness, with over 30 years of experience consulting with many of Rhode Island's largest and best organizations and their affiliates, like Citizens Bank, General Dynamics Electric Boat, Hasbro, Hinckley Yachts, MetLife, Textron Financial. My focus is on building healthy teams and workplaces with sound leadership practices. In 2017, Simon & Schuster, imprint Post Hill Press, asked me to write Successful Leaders Aren't Bullies. The book was released by Simon & Schuster in September of 2018 and is sold out around the world. In December of 2018, a Rhode Island company sued me, falsely claiming a reader could identify this company in my book. In June of 2019, they threatened my publisher, which is tortious interference. My book signings and talks internationally scheduled were stopped. In March of 2023, after 5 years of court delays, this company dismissed the case at a judge's urging with prejudice. and they are doing everything in their power to block my day in court. I graduated from Brown University and I studied organizational behavior and economics and played football. After graduating and failed NFL tryouts, I coached football at Brown, at Penn State University with Paterno and Sandusky, and at the University of Rhode Island where I received my MBA. While and after earning my MBA, I facilitated hundreds of corporate retreats at URI's W. Alton Jones campus. From 1994 to 2008, I designed and then delivered to over 2,500 participants a 50-hour-long Brown University Practice of Management certificate program where I built an elite client base. In private, during my programs, participants shared with me stories of repeated, demeaning, belittling, bullying, and abusive behaviors experienced and witnessed at work. Decent managers fix these problems without retribution. When bullying is reported in toxic organizations, the reporter experiences retaliation, is abused, and often terminated for fabricated errors, false claims of underperformance, or for no cause. I witnessed Rhode Island executives ignore credible workplace shooting threats. I witnessed adult Rhode Island workers crying, breaking down, terminated without cause, leaving jobs on their own, broken. The worst Rhode Island bullying cases led to victim death by suicide. I also learned one of the most abusive Rhode Island organizations received the highest and most amount of Rhode Island workforce improvement grants while employing a manager, and these grants were green-lighted by the governor at the time, and this company employed a manager who knowingly assaulted his workers, and they were the number one recipient of Rhode Island workforce improvement grants. As in my case, bullying organizations may also use the U.S. legal system to file frivolous lawsuits, which is malicious prosecution, to harm their targets. Bullying organizations are rife with turnover, vandalism, violence, absenteeism, poor productivity, and ill will. They often have ties to local, state, and federal institutions and officials. The best employees are often the targets of bullying. Their talents trigger a bully's fear of being exposed as an incompetent fraud. In a bullying case, senior executives know about it. In all bullying cases, senior executives know about it. United States workers have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, protected by the U.S. Constitution. Yet over 72% of the people working in the United States claim to have experienced or witnessed workplace bullying. The U.S. and Rhode Island government's primary responsibility is to protect its citizens. Workplace bullies, like Paterno and Sandusky, are experts at deception and control. They go to great lengths to create misleading appearances. Rhode Island workers need legal protection from deceptive and abusive management practices with Psychological Safety Act and work legislation. So I urge the committee to support the Workplace Psychological Safety Bill H8044. Thank you for your consideration and time. Please contact me with questions in public or private.
Any questions? The book that you wrote.
Yes.
Are the events that you spoke about today spelled out in detail in your book?
All the events, I went through the book with 4 editorial teams assigned to me by Simon & Schuster. All the dates, times, locations, names, everything has changed and massaged. No one can identify. If anyone read my book, they would have no idea who was identifying. Apparently, this company either identified with the perpetrators, which a lot of my friends who read the book and had been abused, but the book wasn't about them, identified with victims, and they assumed it was me, or I think more likely they were just vindictive. I elevated a workplace shooting threat at this place, and they didn't like what I found out about it.
Members of the Labor Committee, I'm Ted Blickwedel. I'm a retired Marine, and Rhode Island resident who became a licensed clinical social worker after I retired from the military. I'm here today to testify in support of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, Bill 8044. I worked as a counselor here in Rhode Island for the VA in the Vet Center program in Warwick from 2009 to 2018, where I provided mental health care for fellow veterans. In 2017, during my tenure there, I filed a complaint with the OIG to have VA officials revise their harmful clinical productive policies that compromise quality mental health care for veterans and the welfare and morale of their counselors in the VA Vet Center program. Subsequently, a federal GAO investigation I helped instigate through Senator Reid validated my allegations. This resulted in congressional legislation passed into law in 2023 to ensure the VA is accountable to protect the quality of services for our veterans, as well as safeguard the welfare and morale of counselors who care for them at over 340 vet centers nationwide. My crusade to rectify these problems gained attention locally and nationally. I've been featured on NBC, NPR, to include the Military Times and other publications to raise awareness about these issues. And my book, Broken Promises, chronicles this whole ordeal as well as the unjust and toxic retaliation tactics employed by VA leadership in attempts to silence me. Their methods of reprisal involved isolation, distancing, shunning, bullying, marginalizing, gaslighting, mobbing, and false accusations. Specific incidents of this I endured, for the sake of brevity, are described in my written testimony, which I submitted to each of you via email prior to this hearing. These attempts by VA leaders to defame my character included improperly implying that I was a mentally unstable combat veteran through fallaciously insinuating I was hostile and dangerous, even though I never committed any acts of aggression or threatened anyone. This abusive and malicious retaliation was intentional, designed to suppress, discredit, and cancel me through wrongfully trying to destroy my credibility and turn my colleagues against me by unfairly belittling and degrading my intelligence and integrity. And basically, through their deceitful denial and manipulation of the facts. These orchestrated retaliation strategies I portrayed are normally used against those who speak truth to power when they report waste, fraud, misconduct, and abuse. It is common practice by government agencies, corporations, and other bureaucracies to protect their agenda and avoid responsibility for negligent guidelines, policies, regulations, and inappropriate behavior, which have damaging effects on employees and people receiving services in their agencies. This is all also well documented, besides my book, in another book by Jacqueline Garrick, who she co-authored with Marina Buck, The Psychological Impacts of Whistleblower Retaliation. It lays out the specific tactics, some of which I named. It's intentional. This is standard operating procedure, and it's got to stop. Just because of the ramifications it has on people trying to do the right thing. These vicious, horrific, and ruthless reprisals I encountered adversely impacted me on numerous levels in ways that were physically, mentally, emotionally, legally, financially, and professionally devastating, which I poignantly conveyed in more detail in my written testimony. Overall, the effect of this for me was more traumatic than any combat experience I ever had because of the level of betrayal and the moral injury that it caused. In conclusion, the consequences of this corrupt and vindictive mistreatment are oppressive, destructive, and demoralizing for whistleblowers and their families, friends, peers, and colleagues. It often results in severe physical, psychological, emotional, legal, career, and financial damage, which includes PTSD, depression, and sometimes suicide. The vast majority of whistleblowers in federal, state, and local levels continue to suffer and endure toxic reprisals inflicted on them by leaders, officials, managers, and administrators who abuse their positions of power. And as you heard, frankly, Rhode Island's no different. It's pervasive everywhere. This is outrageous and inexcusable. It is unethical, scandalous, and appalling that these bureaucrats are allowed to keep going on with this discriminatory, malicious, and despicable behavior with impunity. This is unacceptable, and they must be held to account and ultimately be removed from their place of authority like my supervisor and upper VA management never were. Therefore, I strongly urge this committee and the Rhode Island House of Representatives to pass the Workplace Psychological Safety Act into law in order to end workplace bullying, harassment, discrimination, and violence in Rhode Island in workplaces. This will also give you the opportunity as a legislative body to establish a precedent for other states to follow your lead, since everyone deserves to be in a non-hostile work environment where they can feel safe and thrive. Thank you for your time.